So we were just talking about the Bowman statement, and I was trying to ask people, like, what do you think should be, maybe we can do a quick round of this. What do you think we should do to improve the situation going forward? Because I mean, we've talked, high level. Yes, of course, we should feel our own candidates, but what can we do today? Maybe what can we do in response to the NPC's decision? What can we do in response to this problem? So I don't know if you want to go. Whoever wants to go can take the mic.
Well, if I could just reiterate that I think most immediately, well, let me say, first of all, I think that the points people have made about the broader meaning of this whole battle are very important, especially in regard to the Democratic Party. And the fact that the pressure is not only coming from alleged constituents, although no doubt they do, but also from the top and other ranks of the Democratic Party leadership, which make support for Israel, you have to punch that ticket, otherwise you're not going anywhere. And having said that, I think, so there's a lot to talk about in terms of, so what is DSA? What should it be? How can it get there? And a lot of that is beyond, frankly, what I would even feel competent to say. But I do think it's really important, and I urge people to sign on and fight for their chapters and other organizations, non-DSA organizations, to support the Palestine Working Group's original statement, which I posted the link of earlier. Individuals can sign on. At this point, only organizations are listed publicly, but that is really it's a flag that people need to rally to, because it's the concrete way to say that Palestinian struggle must be at the forefront, and we must have a principled position on that. So I do urge people to, and perhaps someone can repost. Don't seem to be on the regular chat, but if somebody who saw that earlier one can just repost that link, that would be great. And thank you for having all of us.
Yeah, maybe Michael, just to ask follow-up. Should we be asking our chapters to debate this even after the NPC statement? Do you think this is worth it? Because we were talking about in our local chapter of having this debate or not. And one of the issues somebody brought up is like we didn't want to get even more demoralized by procedural arguments.
Well, I mean, as people here have said, this is kind of an unavoidable issue, and it is still a live issue. And the fact that the NPC is refusing to act does not mean that there cannot continue to be calls on the NPC to act, or for other mechanisms, perhaps under the Constitution and bylaws for action to be taken. So I don't think this is not over. Even in regard to Bowman, we have to make sure that it doesn't stay over. And I assume that the NPC statement was issued with the goal of making it be a dead issue, but we have to make sure it's not. And if people here have said, if this is helping to generate forces that support Palestine within DSA, but also other forces on the left of Palestine in general, or rather on the left of DSA, then I think all of that's important. And the discussion we've been having here today needs to be had throughout the organization, because it involves not only questions of Palestine, important as those are, central as those are, but the entire question of what DSA is and should be. So I think that, we obviously need to have I'm not urging people to have a nasty discussion, to the extent that we have any control over that. And in fact, the Palestine Working Group has tried, I think, very hard to be extremely principled in the way it discusses this. But, and we need to have a comradely tone in our discussions with people that may not agree with us. But the discussion itself has to be had, and this is the time to have it, in my view.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I totally agree with Michael. I think it is if chapters haven't discussed it before, it's good to discuss it. I think avoiding some of the bureaucratic debate, and I think get to the political questions, which I think are going to continue to last. I know the Chicago chapter, we're discussing it this coming weekend, even after the NPC statement. And so I think that to better sort of educate and talk about the political questions we brought up today, I think is essential. I think sort of moving forward, in my opinion, again, sort of being more DSA adjacent, I think how we can continue to see this as a need to carry on a political fight around the question of the Democratic Party is essential. I think that is all wrapped up in this. I think that's something to sort of carry in and educate on and sort of continue to fight around. And I think just the other thing that would be important for all socialists to do is to make sure that the most vocal thing that we do around Palestine is not just about trying to expel someone, but I think that there's some work to be done. So I think that like how we can take the energy around people who want to hold the line around Palestine, not just hold the line around someone's membership, but to be engaged in the struggle to fight for Palestinian liberation. And so, you know, that may mean BDS campaigns in local chapters. Is it possible to think and begin to talk about a national campaign against aid to Israel? That being the flashpoint of this whole thing, that being the thing that has brought the contradictions of the electoralist strategy of let's get some people in and do something at some point in the future to, you know, voting for a record amount of funding for Israel. Maybe there's some space for that campaign. So I think that I'm glad too that y'all invited me, and I think that people should continue to push the DSA working group statement, and I think see signing it on as an organizing tool, and let's keep organizing around Palestine. Let's keep exposing the contradictions that support is going to have on the Democratic Party, and fight for a socialism that is actually attributed to the oppressed, that is actually a hard line around imperialism and support for Palestine, and through that is a strategic focus that's not being unstrategic like the NPC statement is, but it is strategic to be able to build a hardened core of anti-imperialist, socialists that are campaign actively and not just talking about it. That's how we're going to sort of get things done.
Thanks a lot, Brian. That was I totally agree with that. That was a really good way to put it.
Yeah,
one thing I
sorry,
think we can do.
I just want to say
one
real
thing
quick.
I think we can do in our chapters.
We're probably going to say
Go
the
ahead.
same thing, Parker. So go.
Sorry, there must be a lag because we were kind of playing, tag there. One thing I think we can do in our chapters is we developed this platform in the course over the summer before the convention, where there was a huge, process of membership feedback, of revisions and stuff. I was on the platform drafting committee, and like I said before, it's a fairly radical platform, but it kind of was published late without any fanfare. I think had the convention been in person, and it was published then, like they're I was a member of the 2019 convention, and there was like New York Times coverage, and I think if the media had caught on to the actual radical things that were in this platform, there would be a lot wider discussion of what our actual political principles are. So I would suggest people take a look at I think every DSA member should read the platform. I think you should host discussions in your chapter, and then, talk about the bridge between what our actual principles are and the political strategy we have, and talk about what, lines are we willing to cross on our principles to, quote unquote, build power, which is a term I wish, I would never hear again, because it's a term that the pro-liquidationist forces are always using to justify. So anyway, I really suggest people take a look at the platform and have those kind of discussions in that chapter, because I do think just Israel and Palestine, which is a huge issue, this is going to be an issue that pops up with every single other one of our principles too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we did have a resolution at convention. It did not make it onto the convention floor, but it addressed exactly this issue, and it was called Tribunes of the People. And the idea was that it would hold all DSA nationally elected, all nationally elected DSA members to the DSA platform. It would be a question of binding all elected representatives to this platform. They would have to fight for it and accept it. This didn't even make it onto the did not make it onto the convention floor. We did have a resolution on the convention floor that was aiming to deal with the question of membership around the principles of DSA, which would say that the political platform and acceptance, not in full agreement, but acceptance of the aims of the platform would be the metric by which you would measure, adherence to the principles and therefore membership. So I think going on for now, I think we need to prepare for the next convention, and we need to pass something like Tribunes of the People at the next convention. And we need to pass, concrete resolutions that will establish that DSA electeds are expected to hold to our line. And I think if Tribunes of the People had passed, I think it would have been a lot harder for the NPC to justify not kicking out Bowman. And I think the problem is that there just wasn't enough support in the organization for this kind of idea of holding candidates accountable. Because I think the argument is, I think some people were kind of puzzled by the argument that we wouldn't want to hold people accountable to the platform. But I think the argument is that we're just not strong enough as a movement. So what we need to do is we need to build more power, as Parker says. And so when people go against our aims, we just mobilize people against them. So like any kind of formal discipline is not necessary when we actually have power. But I think that, to actually build power in around the real movement that expresses our politics, we actually do have to hold people to that platform. And I think there's also fear about the big tent. People say, well, if we, make some kind of discipline around the platform, that's going to get rid of the big tent feature of DSA. And I think the whole big tent idea is flawed, because I think at a certain point, like there's a gate around the big tent that decides who gets to be part of it, I think. And I think it's fair to say that big tent should have a limitation, and that Zionism should be one of the lines that we draw. And I think now that this has happened, I think a lot more people in DSA are going to be open towards something like a Tribunes of the People resolution. So I think moving on, we need to campaign in our chapters and convince people that, we need something like this. We need to build up the majority of people in DSA, build a majority of people in DSA who agree with us, and successfully, campaign around this for the convention. I think until then, there's a lot of educational work we can do. There's a lot of other work that we can do in the meantime. But I think really it's going to come down to actually changing the structures of the organization and actually changing the politics that defines DSA. I don't know if anyone has any ideas about that, but like that's my take on what exactly we could do.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that might or might not be a good way to leave it. I don't know if there's some people who want to say something else, or we haven't got many questions in the chat, just many comments. But aside from that, I mean, I'll say that we are having Michael Fischbach on the podcast next week. Well, it's not the episode, it's not next week. We're recording next week. And we're going to do a special on Palestinian solidarity in the 60s and 70s, both the Black Power movement and the New Communist movement, because it's kind of funny how they face the same, well, it's not funny, it's just history, but they face exactly the same kind of questions. And I think that that will really help just outline how these questions are permanent, right? This is not like, hey, this time we'll figure it out. Like, our fathers, our grandfathers, our grandparents all had the same issues in a slightly different way. And I hope that, bringing back some history from the 70s and the 60s helps us see this in a different light. What were the mistakes made? And how can we avoid making these mistakes? Because like the New Communist movement also split along the questions of Zionism or anti-Zionism. And the Black Power movement, there were people in the Black Power movement who were known as Israel's man in Harlem, Baynard Rustin. So this isn't exactly a new question. And I hope with the discussion we're having with Michael, which hopefully takes place on the 13th and then should probably be released in a few weeks after that, we can begin to revisit this history. So I don't know if there's anything else someone wants to add, or we can just call it a day here. Or
Thanks for letting me come on, guys.
We got someone in the chat saying DSA is on the path to being a neoliberal organization.
I mean, it's true, but it's also true that if we don't fight against it,
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, this is not the time to quit. I understand, Like, it feels like the morally right thing to do. If you want to really express solidarity with, Palestine, the right thing to do is to quit the organization. I don't think that's the case. I think the right thing to do is to keep on fighting. And, because I don't think the problem is that DSA people are subjectively soft on Zionism. Like, I think, majority of DSA at this point is anti-Zionist. It's just the problem is that there's a failure to put principles into practice and to understand how do we actually do real principled politics. And I think that we can learn, and the only learning we will learn is through practice and actually putting these politics into practice. And that means convincing people who don't already agree with us. And I think we can do that most effectively as fellow members in DSA.
Yeah, if I could just add one last thing to that, I think I completely lost my thread of talk. Oh, never mind.
Just to answer to Theodore, there is a lot of evidence that DSA was a science organization. That's one of the topics we'll talk about in this podcast with Michael Fishback. I suggest you read Michael Fishback's book, the one on the movement divided or something like this. He talks exactly about the foundation of DSA and who comes and who founds it and what their attitude towards Israel was. I was actually reading that yesterday, so there is quite a lot in this book about it.
Yeah, DSA was a merger of the New American Movement and the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. I think the New American Movement was more anti-Zionist, and the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, which was like more of Harrington's thing, was more pro-Zionist, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Fishback mentions that Zionism was one of the points over which they almost did a merge, because he was saying that I think one of the two was not willing to accept the other's politics, and I think it was actually the pro-Zionist didn't want to merge with an anti-Zionist organization. This is all in, I think, chapter 8 or chapter 9 of Fishback's book, The Movement Divided.
We have another question. What kind of disciplinary measures would be satisfactory since Bowman isn't getting kicked out? I think that's, if anyone has any ideas on that, feel free to take that one up. Because I frankly don't know. I don't think that short of kicking him out, he really can be disciplined. Because I don't think he's going to change his mind on this.
Ultimately, theoretically, maybe not in this case, but in other cases, if DSA issued a censure on someone, a public statement that was, covered in the media, it would be a symbolic thing, but sometimes a symbolic thing is useful. I think when we put forward a symbolic thing, people say, oh, it doesn't build power, blah, blah, blah. But it does publicly state what our principles are, and it might actually be important to someone in the West Bank that DSA makes a symbolic statement of something like that. It is true that we aren't going to re-endorse him. And I think that, we have to look at this whole process as a victory for the forces who do want to move towards discipline, or at least like a Pyrrhic victory for the kind of pro-liquidation forces in DSA, because it did open a kind of Pandora's box about what discipline is. And I think, short of producing an endorsement strategy that does aim to build a principled, socialist fraction that is accountable to the platform, with people who are themselves like core DSA members and share that kind of electoral vision. Like, we can't just convince the existing politicians to fall in line behind that. But I think if we do, produce that kind of thing in the future, we build to the size, we build to the capacity where, they might be convinced to fall in line. I don't know.
And I think that the logic of electoral strategy that's based on endorsing politicians as opposed to running your politicians sets this whole thing up. So I think that, Donald mentioned about how we need to hold people to principle. Like, why don't they hold a principle? And they don't hold a principle because there's a political strategy of electoralism that says that we're going to get people elected as the be-all, end-all, and through that we will make incremental changes over time to quote unquote build power. I think that has shown that this, in this instance, is wrong, because if we're just endorsing Democratic Party politicians, then that's saying that we, as socialists, as DSA, can exert as much force on a politician than the oldest political party in the world and the most important capitalist country in the world that is a party of capital. Like, I think that, like, until we're building an alternative, that's not just how we can endorse and unendorse and do all this for people if they agree with our values, but try to build a force organized around a socialist platform that people adhere to and run from. I think that's really the only thing in the long term that will be able to sort of undergird this. Otherwise, we'll be fighting about the best process for endorsement and bureaucratic bylaws and all this sorts of stuff. The problem is a political problem, and the problem is a strategy of electoralism within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think what we need to be doing is not just endorsing Democrats who happen to, like, be on, DSA members, so much as we need to be running people as DSA members. And we need to be running as a disciplined electoral fraction that is organized around the platform, that is organized around upholding the platform and fighting for those goals, regardless of what local constituents say. And I think that's another big problem, is this whole idea of constituents and this kind of liberal idea that, well, candidates are elected to represent their constituents, not DSA, so it doesn't make sense to, like, hold them to the platform. But I think that's just a totally backwards way of, like, understanding, like, how you do electoral politics as a socialist, And yes, as Gamma says, that's the problem. The federal candidates don't come from DSA. They come from places like Justice Democrats, and we just endorse them and support them, but we don't actually train people to run for office, to fight as socialists in office. And I think moving forward, that is really what we need to be thinking about for our electoral strategy, is how do we actually train people to run for office and to actually uphold a socialist platform. All right. Any other takes? Someone says, "Then stop endorsing Dems." Well, I wouldn't, I think the question is, like, how do we convince the rest of DSA to do that? Because I'm all for, like, just not messing with the Democrats at all. I think the question is, though, how do we actually convince the rest of DSA that it's valuable to not do so? Because there's this fear that if you're not running as a Democrat, you can't get elected whatsoever because third parties have fared so badly in this country. And I think, there's a problem with, like, acting like, the existing electoral system is fixed, that it can't be changed. I think one thing DSA could do a lot more to actually do is to kind of fight electoral laws and to fight for reforms that would make actual independent campaigns more viable. But I think in the meantime, we need to do that, but we also need to actually hold the people who are elected as Democrats in DSA to account. I think, if the Democratic Party is just a ballot line, and that running as a Democrat is just a ballot line issue, then we should actually treat it that way. And I don't see that happening, and that's the problem. And I think if we actually, if we were actually running as, Democrats, but still upholding socialist politics and acting as a disciplined fraction, I would still think that we do need to move towards independence, but it would still be an improvement over where we are. And I think it would create more friction with the established Democratic Party, which would make an actual break more feasible to the membership, I think. Any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process. It's like, like I said, the ballot line, like I said, I kind of agree with the fact that it's less important, in the sense, like, as long as you keep yourself as a principled, like, I think we mentioned one of our articles, anti-entrists. saying like, we are using the ballot line, but we don't want to caucus with them. But then again, it's like problems of squaring a circle. Running as a third-party candidate, it worked in one city council, but in Seattle, but it's unfortunately it's not been shown to be scalable. But yeah, I know. So just before we continue, I know we're moving a bit away from Palestine. So Brian and Michael, if at any moment you feel bored, you wanna leave or excuses, just let us know. And we thank you a lot for being here. And you have no, don't feel obliged to say for Donald and me rambling about this. So yeah. But if you're interested, we'll let you talk. But just to say this, anyway. But going back,
to end it, my part, I would just say thank you for having us. And I think the discussion of these issues in DSA, I mean, not just Palestine, but what Palestine represents in DSA, and the comments that you guys have been making about the broader implications are really important discussions to be having. Again, I haven't really been involved in DSA other than Palestine. So my contributions on that are limited for that reason, but I certainly, what you're saying resonates with me, and I wish you the best of luck and hope that we can connect those broader debates, and Palestine is clearly a cutting edge of that. So again, nothing is more of a cutting edge in any movement that I've been part of in Palestine, going all the way back to the 60s and 70s and beyond and before, and the left has a very checkered history. All parts of the left, in fact, have a very checkered history. I mean, so in regard to Palestine. So thank you for having me. I will take off, and good luck to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce too, and I echo Michael's thanks for having us on. And I think good luck. I too am. All right, Michael is in DSA. I'm not in DSA, but I obviously am very adjacent and work closely with a lot of comrades. And so, keep fighting. I think that's really key. And I think essentially, we need to overturn the logics of electoralism that we're going to change through primarily through parliamentary means. And so, dirty break or clean Blake or all that sort of stuff. I think, social struggle from below that is combative, that is disruptive, that changes consciousness in rapid pace, like we saw in the Unity Intifada in the spring, that's the way that social struggle changes. And so we should be engaged in electoral politics. That's for sure. We should be there. We need a socialist strategy. But I think we should also make sure that, struggle from below is really how the change works. Meet Moop. I'm not on Twitter. So maybe if you can just contact Cosmonaut or Tempest on Twitter, they can give you my email address. And I'm also on Facebook under my real name. So thanks, comrades. Good luck with the fight, and look forward to collaborating in the future.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on.
So I think this is pretty much a good place to end the stream. Everyone who's been participating, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't want to end it, but I thought that, maybe Michael and Brian, they want to talk too much about the dirty break. But I do feel like maybe what I want to say is, I used to think a lot that third party was a solution, but third party for electoral means is definitely not the solution. Like I said, the anti-entrism Rosa wrote in one of the first articles of Cosmonaut is so important that, if you're going to use the ballot line, at least make it clear that you are using the ballot line.
Right.
And I think the Jamal Bowman thing is more like he's not using the ballot line. He is implicated in this. And I know that, Marxist Unity Group and you yourself, you post a lot the strength of federal campaigns, and I feel like federal campaigns have their use. I also think that the fetishism on local issues is also like too much of a fetish, but it really seems like in local issues you can at least keep control of your candidate way more in the kind of the federal level, because AOC was playing with Pelosi, and Pelosi took her out and lectured her, and she cried. Because there is when you're playing with levels of power, you're never going to be playing at the local level. You're really playing at the world scale,
Yeah, I think just getting good at actually doing this at the local level would really help. I think, that's really the, but I think, we need to have both local and national strategies. I think we need to be working simultaneously at both levels. And I think the ability to get a use of the ballot line on the federal level is very low. We don't have enough members to win a House district by ourselves.
Yeah.
So, no more federal reps are probably coming unless we get really lucky with a cadre candidate.
Yeah.
Well, that's not promising, but but yeah, I think I just want to say that I think, it's kind of final statement. I think, anti-imperialism is we need to make this a dividing line in the U.S. working class, and kind of in the same way that slavery was a dividing line in the U.S. Civil War. I mean, it needs to be a kind of what side are you on type of question. And I think, Israel and Palestine and the settler colonial, Zionist entity, that is an issue that I think we can really make a dividing line around the issue of imperialism. And I think we can use that as a way of kind of agitating and building that kind of that dividing line that will allow us to more effectively, build an anti-imperialist working class movement. And, this is why is anti-capitalism never a talking point? I think it is a talking point. I think the SA people critique capitalism all the time. Like I think it's not enough to be against capitalism in the abstract. We actually have to be anti-imperialist, and we have to oppose the actual concrete capitalist system at the world level.
Yeah, I think another problem is, people say like I'm anti-capitalist, as we understand that capitalism is a free market. So I think that sometimes talking about anti-capitalism, anti-neoliberalism is a bit, slippery. I don't think it's so much people are afraid to discuss it. It's slippery because you can see roads are socialist.
Right, exactly. It's easy to be anti-capitalist these days. Like everyone is anti-capitalist now. Everyone has some, even like right-wingers are increasingly anti-capitalist, sense that they're critical of big tech, they're critical of corporate power. I think it's not just enough to be anti-capitalist. You got to be anti-imperialist, and Israel is where that dividing line comes in.
So where can we find you? I'm on Twitter. I'm also I'm one of the editors of Cosmonaut. Take care of the podcast. I write under the name Renato Flores, and that's in Cosmonaut too. So generally Cosmonaut Discord, and yeah. And
all right, I think any last words, Rudy, before we close this off?
No, this was good. I mean, I like that we brought perspectives from Max, Brian, and Michael, and I think that Max said something extremely important about listening to voices, because we do that all the time when we filter out. When we talk, we hear about listen to Venezuelan voices or listen to whatever. We are Cuban voices. We are aware of that, but we are not aware of that when we listen to Palestinian voices. And I thought what Max said about which voices you listen to was very important. And yeah, if we have to learn something from the stream was listening to Max say that. And that's my last word. Yeah.
People say listen to Venezuelan voices. Well, which Venezuelan voices? Mm-hmm. Venezuelans aren't united. So when people say listen to Palestinian voices, you have to, which Palestinian voices? What side of the movement are you talking about? So yeah, very important take in my opinion as well.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna stop the stream. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Yes, thanks everyone.
And see you soon.